Hi, this is Joe Hage. I have the privilege of leading your medical devices group, which, as of this recording, has 311,000 members worldwide. And perhaps more than any other group member, John and Gary and the folks over at ReadTech, I think, are responsible for our growth because they have consistently given us great value in on this topic, which is in such high demand that this is our 7th collaboration. John Larenk is going to talk to us today about good submissions and beyond, and then he's going to get on a plane and go to Thailand. So pay careful attention before his jet lag. John, you're up.
All right, thank you, Joe. And again, thanks for having us with this webinar, and thanks to everybody who's joining. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. As Joe mentioned, my name is John Lawrence, and I'm a UDI product manager here at Reed Technology. So just for over the last 3 years or so, been working in the UDI space. So today's presentation discussion we'd like to have is about the GUDID submissions themselves and what happens beyond the submission. It's not the final step getting into the FDA GUDID. There's other areas in which you could leverage your UDI data. The objective will be to have an overview of the FDA UDI compliance mandate, and to also discuss how to gather your data and ensure success when submitting to the GUDID, as well as avoiding problems others have encountered, and mentioned earlier how to understand how the data can be leveraged downstream. So first, I'll have a brief overview of the FDA UDI regulation. Then I'll move into a UDI and GUDID implementation plan. Lastly, cover leveraging the GUDID data downstream, and then we'll go into some Q&A. What you see on your screen is probably famous to everybody. When the FDA released the final rule on September 24th, 2013, I know I was actually at a UDI conference in Germany when that rule hit, and basically everything we talked about while we're over in Germany, while folks here in the U.S. were preparing to get started. Essentially, the rule states that medical devices distributed in the United States must carry a unique device identifier, or UDI. And as part of creating these UDIs, the FDA created a system to gather all the information, and that's called the Global Unique Device Identification Database. You'll hear me refer to that as GUDID later in this presentation. Other folks say GUDID. I tend to say GUDID, so this is what I will be referring to. And this GUDID includes a standard set of data elements which identify the device for each unique device. This slide shows some of the purposes of UDI implementation. Note that UDI itself is a data, or at least the GUDID submission itself, is a submission of data associated with the device. That submission alone does not provide all of these things that you see on the screen. However, it can start the conversation. We now have a standardized set of medical device data, which now can make things like this much be more efficient or achieve things we have not done in the past. True, we have done adverse event reporting in the past, but now when the UDIs start being added in the adverse events, you'll be able to experience some more efficiencies among that process. So what is the UDI? The UDI is a unique numeric or alphanumeric code that consists of 2 parts. There's the device identifier and a production identifier. The device identifier is a mandatory fixed portion of the UDI that identifies the labeler and a specific version and model of the device. This is actually the information. The device identifier is what is submitted to the FDA into the GUDID. Production identifier is more conditional, and it has information included on the label, such as lot or batch number, serial number, manufacturing date, etc. This information itself does not get submitted to the FDA as part of your UDI submission and get loaded into the GUDID. Again, only the device identifier information will go to the GUDID. A little overview of the regulation. Obviously, there's labeling impact for your label to mark and bear a UDI, both the device identifier and production identifier, and have the UDI in a human readable plain text, automatic ID and data capture technology, barcoding. There's also data format changes that had to be applied to the labels. With the UDI came direct marking requirements. There's tons of documentation available on the FDA's website, and I believe I have some reference material at the end of this presentation, which you could use at your own leisure to read up on some of the direct part marking requirements. And as mentioned, the FDA GUDID also being a key component of this regulation. Submitting that data and device attributes to the FDA, which they process, validate, and then ultimately pass over to the National Library of Medicine to host on a public website called Access GUDID. Lastly here is reporting. What you'll begin to see or have already started seeing is some of the other responsibilities you may have will start including the UDI, again, for more tracking and traceability. And it gets back to my point saying that the UDI itself does not alone provide track and trace, but it helps make it easier to get there, to tie these other things together. With the label data versus the GUDID submission data, some of the data, as mentioned, is going to be the part of the production identifier, which is more geared to what's happening in your labeling systems, on your product package label, and the end user would be able to see this information. Whereas the GUDID data are these large group of device attributes you may or may not be aware of, depending on what your product, how it is compiled, could have up to around 62 fields. And all that data has to be submitted to the FDA, as mentioned, ultimately hosted on the National Library of Medicine site. However, what we see is there's various sources of this data, which becomes quite problematic. And having to go out and source, or first identify and source where the data is coming from is quite a challenge in the front. So I want to kind of plant that seed right now, as until later we start thinking about leveraging UDI as a way to start achieving master data management for your device inventory in the future. Another slide here on the regulation, the classic timeline. The class 3 devices, we went through that wave in 2014. But then we was followed by the implantable life-sustaining, life-supporting devices submitted in 2015. As I mentioned to Joe, that's also when I had my first son. So I missed that. My son was born on the 23rd. But now we have the class 2 devices. So creeping up on my son's first birthday, we have a huge wave expected of class 2 to be submitted this year. The FDA did hear industry, when the contact lens industry had some pushback on submitting according to the original deadline they were given, stated the nature in which their products was making it quite challenging to adhere to their timelines. A few months towards the end of the year last year, the FDA did publicly state that they will extend the deadline for soft contact lens manufacturers into 2017. They also mentioned that there will be a updated technical implementation guide released, I believe they said March of 2017, which will describe some of the differences in which you need to capture and submit the soft contact lens information. Being a UDI system product manager, I'd love to have those specs a lot sooner than that. So hopefully some of the, as time goes on, the FDA can start releasing some details sooner rather than later. And lastly, we have the class 1 deadline in September of 2018. Just a note here, only 6 months left until the class 2 submissions are due, so it's really time to get cracking on this solution if you have devices in that class. What I'm showing is as simple as I can 4-step approach of GUDID implementation. Starting up with your GUDID system prep, GUDID data prep, submitting the data, and once your submissions are completed, moving into maintenance mode and also achieving some downstream use. Step one with GUDID system prep, it's important to evaluate, select, and implement your GUDID solution. So that's, well, in future slides I'll show some of the options there. Creating your FDA GUDID accounts. This is something that all labelers have to do. No matter what type of solution that you choose, you will need a GUDID account from the FDA. And also creating FDA ESG accounts. If you're utilizing HL7SPL to submit to the GUDID, you will require to have an operating ESG account. And that's the, for those who may not know, the ESG is the FDA Electronic Submissions Gateway, which is utilized to make electronic submissions to the agency. So starting first with identifying your requirements, this slide has plenty of links, and again, I know Joe will be distributing these slides, so please feel free to use this as a resource and tool. Hopefully it's organized well and can help you find what you're looking for. So a couple links here on learning the basics of UDI. CRH does a great job of e-learning system as well, and they also post some recorded live webinars to kind of get their perspective of everything. And there's, as you can imagine, quite a bit of guidance to go through with the final rule, guidance for industry, and getting more specific into the data elements that are required to be submitted. So as you have an understanding of, at least a high-level understanding of what's going to be required, you need to start identifying what you have. What are your device classes, product codes? Be sure you're aware of what your compliance date is. The FDA does have some sort of exceptions. I don't know how frequently they grant extensions and things of that nature, but all that information is available in a link at the end of this, in the reference material as to how to check that out. But for the most part, I don't see it being as that active. And then also check any industry associations and providers. As you're looking more into your situation, one of the tough things that I see with our clients is, where do I get the data? So that's a huge analysis effort that has to happen up front to understand where the data is in your organization. Do you have any gaps? Are there owners of that data? What format's that data being stored, et cetera. Also looking at any internal standards you may already use. With the UDI, there are different issuing agencies you can utilize, and maybe you're already using GS1 G10s, or maybe there's nothing in place yet, so evaluate those standards. Knowing how UDI is going to impact different groups in your organization, start thinking about how workflow, any compliance documentation, training that may have to be changed to meet this new process that will now be a requirement. Or there may not be anything in place at all yet, and you have to completely create all of this from scratch. Evaluating your internal systems, again, if you have an existing MDM, so if you have a master data management system already, and you are foresightful and collecting all of this data, or at least something similar to the data, since the FDA began talking about this, then you're well ahead of the pack, and that's fantastic. But for the most part, what I see is there's perhaps multiple master data management systems that have different data for different reasons in different groups. So, you know, an evaluation has to occur there for what the FDA is going to be expecting, the source of truth, the source of what should be the source value of each element, of the true value. And then any other technology you may have with barcoding, how may that be impacted? To evaluate and select a GUDID solution, you have a few options. At a high level, the FDA allows for manual entry directly into their GUDID database. So in that case, you would still have to gather all your data, and you're entering it in directly into the FDA system and saving it there. That is the FDA stated that's more for lower level volumes, as you do have to manually enter each record one by one, and it has limited functionality with what you could do with it afterwards. It's really designed just to get the data. Another option is the HL7 SPL submission, which is targeted for folks who have larger quantity devices, want to make a more efficient submission in a way they could read data from existing systems, or creating even MDM type systems with medical device data that has a connection to the FDA to shoot changes when changes are made. So that is the solution in which you also need the FDA electronic submissions gateway, and again, you would have to set up a FDA GUDID account as well. I'll dive a little bit deeper now into these two options here. So for the medical device manufacturers, as mentioned, you could perform the manual entry of those records, the FDA's interface, and be there. You'll be loaded in the FDA GUDID. From a HL7 perspective, you could purchase or subscribe to software applications in which could take in your data, perform various validation performed against the data to ensure it'll pass the FDA's checks before submitted, and then ultimately submit to the FDA again into the GUDID. And we also see a good amount of folks outsourcing. So they might gather the data and go through that effort, or look for some help in gathering the data, and then simply hand off that data template to a vendor and say, knock yourself out. And usually that happens also in an HL7 submission model. The few organizations we have seen have built their own. So if you have the staff and dedicated resources to stay on top of this as essentially a full-time job, then we have seen that happen a few times where they make that investment to build in-house. Some of the comparison to these submission methods. There is, first off, for the FDA GUDID web interface, as I mentioned, you're manually entering the records. It's really suited for low volume. You have to QA within the system, and you have the FDA's help desk available for you. But again, it's for slower. It's going to be slower in the event that you have to enter everything manually, but if you have one record, maybe that's okay for you. Technically, no software costs. You're utilizing the FDA's application. However, there's absolutely administration and data entry, QA, labor costs. There's still, someone's got to do it, and that cost is still there. From hosted software, you're using external software to collect data, build, and electronically submit. This is more of the software as a service model, where it's not installed into, it's not installed in your four walls. And this is also suited for low to high volumes. Technically, you have subject matter expertise at these available to you to support and training the system. And it's a database-driven solution where you could do more work in bulk. You're essentially, from a technology cost, you're renting this shared database, so you typically see subscription models. But again, anything like servers and all that kind of stuff, you don't have to worry about it. That's the vendor is managing that. And for the operational costs, it would be the admin labor. So even though you don't own the software, you're utilizing it, you're still going to have employees at your organization utilizing the software to submit to the FDA and maintain any records that may have changed. As mentioned, the outsource service, there's that external partner that's really going to help you build the data, submit to the FDA, and all of that on your behalf. There will still be some resource needed, because any contractor helping you is going to have to understand your organization and makeup, but there are people out there to help you do all of that. It's we do say it's the least internal effort, again, other than the fact that you will need an owner in your organization to work with these consultants to ensure they know where to go to get the data they need. Here also you're renting a shared database or software, whatever they have, but you have now costs for the contractor and a service cost as well. The last option was the on-premises installed software. So this is the build, buy, install, validate, trade, the whole suite internally. So this, we would only see this really recommended for high volume submissions. The only help you're going to get is going to be from the FDA help desk, because you don't really have a vendor at this case. You are creating it yourself. And it's mostly, as I said, internal effort unless you contract software development providers to help you. In this case, you will own the software. You will also need to set up an ESG account because for the most part, we see with hosted software, that gets connected to the ESG directly, so you're kind of getting that in that subscription fee for usage of the system. But then operational costs, obviously, administration of that system, maintenance of that system, operations, and labor. Okay. Now, creating the FDA accounts, I mentioned this is required regardless of your submission type. You have to contact the FDA with a form and request to open up a pre-production GUDID account. So this process starts with the labeler requesting via this web form, and you identify which submission type you will be leveraging for UDI. Again, your option being web interface or SPL. If you do elect web interface, the FDA will go ahead, process the request, and open up a GUDID pre-production account for you. So there you go. It pretty much ends the process there. If, however, your submission type is SPL, you now will have to wait for the FDA to create a pre-production GUDID account, and then they will contact you with login information so then you can begin setting up testing. Since you chose the HL7 SPL method, this is an XML transfer into the FDA system, so they do ask that you perform a few scenarios of submission testing. So that'll be required at any case, even if you already had an account under another company. But then the labeler, again, as mentioned, will submit those 6 SPL test scenarios, and for the most part, that's okay. But if it seems kind of generic, the FDA might ask you to submit some more data. Once complete, the FDA will email you and let you know that they've accepted that your test submissions were valid, and they'll go ahead and create a production account for you. And now is the time where you will now redirect your ESG from your production ESG account to your production FDA GUDID account. Once that's complete, you're essentially all set up for making live submissions. However, you may not be ready yet, but at least you have the connection. Step 2 is collecting the source data and normalizing and validating that source GUDID data. And here I also want to start, again, painting this theme of master data management. As you see on this chart, there are various places in which data is coming from, multiple storage locations and formats, and we have this huge data collection effort now to obtain all of the GUDID data elements. This is something that we're probably not going to want to have to replicate again in the future. This slide shows again, some more detailed examples with collecting data from production systems, PLM systems, ERP systems, any regulatory relations that you have, and also the external organizations. This data set requires DUNS numbers from Dun & Bradstreet, GMDN codes, the information from your issuing agency. And now with the 55 or so GUDID values in the records, we highly recommend using a data template to organize and collect this content. What you're doing now is you're beginning to have your organization step into a master data management solution for your medical device portfolio. If you think about it, you're working to make a regulatory submission. However, you're also doing a lot of the work to organize data and centralize it, when in the past it was, and as we can see, it was dispersed out in all these different locations. UDI can actually help create a master record for your device. And with that thought, it might be advised to collect additional data fields. You're already going through all this. Say the FDA wants these 55, but maybe there's some additional data you want to start collecting and associate with your device identifiers. Or maybe you're thinking about future submissions to international agencies, and okay, maybe this device is this class in the US, but in Canada it's this class. Start thinking about things like that. Here's an example of our data collection template that we provide to our clients. Essentially, again, laid out with all the FDA required fields, but also expanded so you can collect additional data. We also provide some reference tabs to help guide you in that data collection effort. Screenshot here showing data which could be captured on a label. We've worked with clients which stated, this is what I have. They didn't have this data available electronically anywhere. So we're literally looking at labels and looking at icons to determine expiration date and such. So you can see if that's something that you have to do, this would be an example of that data mapping. You would have to get into a standardized template. Slides showing some data collection issues that we've encountered and would like to share. Just to kind of set the universe of data here, if you have 1,000 device records, so assuming 1,000 device identifiers, and each record is 55 fields, we're talking about gathering 55,000 fields of data. So some of that obviously may be similar and reusable, but most are going to be unique. That's why they are unique devices. Again, data being in the disparate locations, so identifying where that is, getting it, and consolidating it. But still, start keeping in mind that how can we now end this and start centralizing this data later. If there's data owners at the company, getting them engaged. Maybe there is no data owner anymore if someone has left the company. There's going to be varying formats in which your data exists. This is the first time it's being submitted electronically and being put against rigorous electronic validation rules. So until you have that standardized data set, you could expect almost all variety. And as illustrated with the previous slide, you may not even have digital format. You might have to use the label template as a graphic guide to identify what your data value should be. Some of the fields that we've seen being more problematic are the labeler DUNS numbers. We saw this also when we were working with electronic product listing in SPL for CEDAR and CBER. When they introduced the DUNS number in SPL submissions, it was totally new to the industry. So there is some time that needs to be taken to do some research at your organization to find out which DUNS number is appropriate to use for your UDI submission. And that's all managed through a company called Dun & Bradstreet. Now we have the GMDN or FDA preferred term values. We've seen things where maybe the GMDN code's obsolete and there's a new term preferred. So just be mindful to ensure you're using what you have as the latest, or if not, you may receive a message from the FDA when you submit with data that may be obsolete. There's also a whole slew of device identifiers that could be assigned. What we're mentioning earlier was the primary device identifier, which is the DI part of the UDI. However, there's other areas in which in the data set you could have device identifiers assigned. ReadTech actually recently released an ebook on device identifiers, which will be available for download, which goes into the descriptions of all the different, actually it'll be next week, all to the different device identifiers and where they apply. Also packaging and kit configurations. Being working with SPL for about 11 years now, kits always tend to be the challenge for everything, whether we're working with drugs, combination products, medical devices, they just always seem to be special. So now, looking to normalize and validate this source data. We're showing again the multiple storage locations and formats, collecting that, and now normalizing and validating. This is now we're getting close to the point where we're going to have a valid data set that we could submit to the FDA, either web interface or SPL. Normalizing steps, you're going to have to apply FDA business rules. So the GS1 G10s have certain numeric business rules. There's certain date formatting. There's a ton of controlled terminology. So you have to say CM, and actually, I believe my slide's a little misleading here. I believe it's open bracket CM, closed bracket is the technically correct field value. So you have to ensure you have it in that format. If you submitted centimeter to the FDA, that would not pass validation. There's also grouped data that you have to, if you're submitting one value, you have to submit all three. An example of that is your clinically relevant size, type, value, and units. There's also dependent data in there that if you're answering yes to a particular true-false question, then a yes may mean, and tell us what your sterilization method is. So there's all types of different validation rules related to the way the data is being gathered. And I can tell you with experience, the validation specifications probably just under 200 pages. So there's a lot of reading to do if you're looking to begin. However, there are obviously some applications out there that can help guide you or also automate some of those translations for you, such as read text system. Continuing with the GMDN code, I touched on this briefly earlier with the GMDN codes becoming inactive. Checking that terminology to confirm the code is correct is key. If you do not do that and you submit anyway, that would be something you could get an error back in a what they call as an Act 3 failure message if you submit through SPL, and the FDA would inform you that that's obsolete. So I would recommend doing that check up front because the FDA is not going to tell you what the correct value is, so you're going to have to do that research anyway. Again, looking at that list of values, with this being a HL7 electronic submission, is very strict with the way in which you have your data formatted. That sounds really painful and I guess annoying, but just to think that you're going through this rigorous exercise to get clean, pristine data for all of your devices in your portfolio, what can you do with that downstream? I just want to keep kind of planting that seed because you're going through this exercise now for this submission requirement, but at the end, you're going to have a very trusted source of medical device data in your organization. Some of the lessons we've learned with the data are receiving incorrect data values. So with data not being electronic up front, you may have some manual typing, handwriting or whatever typing, you're reading handwriting for entry. So you got to perform some quality checks depending on where that data is coming from. The incorrect date formats, not using controlled terminology. We've also seen the product identifier being included with the device identifier, but that's not what is going to be submitted. Invalid check digits come across, or direct marking DI or packaging DIs. Again, I will again just state to look out next week for that ebook on DIs that will explain how they should be assigned properly. We also see invalid labeler DUNS numbers. I mentioned that was a pain point in ensuring that the DUNS number that you register with the FDA in your GUDID account matches what's in your SPL files or your manual entry files when you send to the FDA. Invalid FDA listing number is a little common as well, and since this is proprietary information, software service providers is something that, and I'm not quite sure how it would be at the organization, it's a little gap there because there's no publicly available list to cross-validate that you have the right listing number. So I've seen these come back sometimes where what one organization thought actually was the listing number was something different than what the FDA thought. So you could realize some interesting feedback results. Again, just with the information the FDA is looking to receive and the business rules that require proper entry, these are just a few of the things we're seeing. I didn't want to have 30 slides on potential data issues, but I hope this top 16 will become useful. And again, you could reference at the end of the presentation as you have the slides. Step 3 is now we can finally talk about submitting. So submitting to the GUDID and verifying your submission is public. The high-level flow of we've gone from gathering our data, normalizing it, and now we're at the point to input in the web interface or submit via SPL and achieve success with published records. So now we're ready to go live. Manual entry, as mentioned, you're entering draft records into the database. You're going to have to send those for review so you can perform an FDA validation check. You have to perform a QC of those records in there to ensure accurate, because once you hit that submit button, you're giving that to the FDA and setting the published state of the record. For automated bulk entry, this is more of the HL7 SPL. This is when now you would be ingesting the data that you have gathered and validating that data. For most part, vendors allow you to validate it prior to even getting to this point, but you're essentially loading it into the vendor system or your internally developed system and building the SPL UDI files per the HL7 technical specification. Once that's complete, you'll submit the UDIs to the FDA via ESG. There's two different options. There's Web Trader, where you have to log into a portal site, and then you have to submit one record at a time. That's not very tempting for a UDI solution. So we elected at RETEC, we have the AS2 ESG connection, so we can send bulk submissions to the FDA. Essentially, we know the FDA only really looks to have 500 active submissions occurring at one time per labeler. However, we're able to load in as many records are available and then throttle those submissions to adhere to the FDA's volume requirements. So if you're looking for bulk, high volume processing, the AS2 is definitely the way to go, but you might have to do some customization to ensure you're adhering to the FDA's loading requirements. Verifying your submission, you can verify in the web interface. You could log in, look at your data, and do all this prior to your grace period ending. Right now it's 30 days. So 30 days after your DI publish date, the FDA will go ahead and publish your record in Access GUDID. If you're an HL7 submitter, you're going to be monitoring, looking for your acknowledgments. These are coming from the Electronic Submissions Gateway. So Act 1 stating the FDA received something. It's just like a handshake between your account and their account. Act 2 states that CDRH received the submission package from you, but still it could be a picture of Mickey Mouse. They haven't opened it up and looked at it yet. And now Act 3 is when they really drill in and analyze your SPL and perform the full validation. This will result in an Act 3 pass or fail message. If everything's fine, you'll get submission successful. However, if you have errors, the FDA will start returning you those errors in a phased approach. Unfortunately, it's not all error messages throughout that entire file at once. They have about 4 steps of validation, and as long as you get through the first step, they go to the next. But then if you have an error in the second step, they stop and send you a message, and they never got the steps 3 and 4. So it's not very comprehensive with the validation results in one shot. However, ideally, if you have an SPL system, it's designed to do all that at once, so you don't have to piecemeal the submissions. now you can indicate your GUDID record published status. As mentioned, when you submit and your DI published date has yet to hit, you'll be unpublished. But once your DI published date occurs, you'll be in the grace period for 30 days. Once that's done, you're final published. You're in the public domain with your record. There are some things that can be done through the submissions and interface to retire a product if it's being taken off market. And I'd just like to remind everyone that if you have any questions with the content I'm covering, you can submit those questions throughout the session, and we will queue them up to the point where we get to Q&A. So you could just type them through one of the moderators. The questions module. So some lessons learned on submissions. Incorrect GUDID application information. This is a bit of a manual process, I believe, between labelers and the FDA. This is when you're filling out that application to have your GUDID account created. And we've known a few times in where we were identified as a third-party submitter with our correct DUNS number. But then as we moved on to make submissions, and mostly test submissions, our clients receiving failures saying that this third-party submitter is not authorized to submit for this labeler. So what was the problem there? The problem was when we got notified by the FDA that we were set up, they didn't technically set it up yet at the time. So we went with some test submissions a few days later, but their database truly didn't have the updated DUNS number for ReadTech in there. And after a query to the FDA, it quickly and magically was resolved. We also see duplicate submissions. There is submission record life cycle rules that you have to adhere to. A DI can only be submitted and published once. You cannot have multiple versions of it. However, you can maintain a subset of the data elements after you've been published. Otherwise, you're going to have to make a new submission for a new DI. The missing FDA acknowledgement. So the volume of submissions for these GUDID submissions is quite substantial and compared to anything else the FDA receives, other than I'd say maybe adverse event reporting. Each primary device identifier is its own SPL submission. So there are times, just to give you a sense of volume, to this point, I believe ReadTech has submitted over 130,000 UDIs. And we've been doing this for since the submission mandate in 2014. However, we've been making drug listing submissions since 2009, but since multiple products could be in a SPL for that submission type, maybe we've submitted about 10,000, 15,000. So just the volume just explodes doing the one-at-a-time approach. And as a result, that's a lot of load for the FDA ESG to take. So we do absolutely experience some performance issues where the system goes down. The FDA system goes down, they maybe lose acknowledgments. So you really got to have a solution in place to keep an eye on that to ensure that you're getting back what you're really looking for. You're getting back what you're expecting. Also, when the FDA help desk has been fantastic, they have a very well set up help desk system where you actually get a help desk ticket number. And from all the queries I'd entered, I've always gotten a response in a reasonable time. However, if you're giving them more information in your query, I think it's better success to get a quicker response. One of the key things is a core ID is what you would receive in an SPL submission. If you're following up to see maybe where your third acknowledgment's been because it's been a few days. So that's been very helpful. Submitting close to the compliance date is challenging because that's when we really see the peak of the FDA volume hitting their ESG account. So I would recommend if you're getting ready, just get it done as quickly as you can and not wait. In the past, the FDA has extended compliance dates maybe like 30 days, and a lot of that's because just the volume they're getting, so they could process all the data So, try not to get caught up into the autumn rush of the UDI submissions. But then, ultimately, we get there. This is where you'll be. This is the UDI repository that's hosted by the National Library of Medicine, Access GUDID. So once you have expired your grace period, it gets publicly visible. So I just want to stress that make sure your organization is aware of that grace period, because that's the 30-day window in which you can make any corrections to a previously submitted record that has yet to be published. So they give you that time to double check, even though your submission went through, is successful. You just go ahead and review it there, and you have the opportunity to catch it before it gets published to this site. So step 4 is, now we've actually kind of started production, but maintaining the systems and start thinking about leveraging the GUDID data beyond your submission. Start production with UDI, confirming your device records published in GUDID, as was showing in the previous slide. Cutover process to include UDI on product and package labels, and with direct marking where applicable. You're going to have to manage any existing inventory within a 3-year allowed window, and flow your device identifier and product identifier from production systems to labels. This is now a way you could use the data in other ways. And how do you do that? This is where having a medical device master data management solution can help you achieve some of these efficiencies. You've gone through this rigor of collecting all this data, consume it back into your information and maintain it from there, and let it drive other processes. Data maintenance step is updating, retiring labels and GUDID records. So you have to keep an eye on that. If products are getting taken off the market, we're going to have to clean that up in the GUDID, and add device labels and GUDID records for new products. You'll start experiencing this when you have a product change coming, and you realize that a couple of values have to change, and they go, oops, you can't change that, you're already published. The FDA is telling you this requires a new primary device identifier, and you have to either retire the old one or let the old one let it ride until it's no longer on the market. There's system maintenance, update, validate, train. We all know this. So that's, we say here for in-software or in-house software only, but even if you're utilizing SaaS, subscribed software, there's still going to be some procedures and SOPs and such that you're going to have in place with your organization, and train on those and keep those current. And knowledge maintenance, monitoring and implementing changes of the FDA regulations and guidance. There is a way to subscribe to email notifications. It's the same ones that everyone gets. We get them here at ReadTech, and it's part of our day-to-day activity is always to ensure that we're on top of what is happening in UDI for US FDA, and also what's coming in the future internationally. For those of you who may have seen one of our earlier webinars in which my colleague Gary Sainer led, you might have seen a slide similar to this. And the purpose of the slide at that time was to show, I changed some of the labels, but I kept the image. If Gary's on, he'll see. If not, I'll show him when he comes back. It was previously showing, wow, look, you have data in all these places, and you need it here to submit to GUDID. So, but this is now later in the game. You did that. You collected all that data. What you should have now is you achieved the master data set, right? All of the data that you collected from all these individuals has now been consolidated. So start thinking, how could you leverage that? How bring that into a master data management system if you have one. If you do not have one, start thinking about creating one. Because now you can feed the data back to them as needed and always be relying on one single source of truth. And I think that's really an important discussion that organizations have to have so they can start receiving some value out of the investment that they made for UDI compliance. So again, GUDID data is master data. It consolidates all the data that was previously dispersed into various systems. all of that validation we were talking about earlier, and also the pieces I chose not to bore you with. This data has gone through it. So what better source of trusted data could you have for your devices? So again, recommend syncing that data to existing MDM systems or use as a baseline to develop one. Start adding more to the fields. Leverage and synchronization of product data with your labeling systems, ERP systems. This is all something that some folks are already doing. I mentioned including the additional non-GUDID data to strengthen that data set. This helps prepare you for what's coming next. If it's international submissions, if it's there's a new regulation coming out for customs called ACE, where they have some similar data sets being required, but then other data that is also not involved in the GUDID. And how about some analytics? Now that you have this standardized data, your own, and also what's published on the FDA or an Access GUDID, what type of analytics can you layer on top of that to see if you can discover trends? You could even use it for competitive intelligence or analysis using the data that's on Access GUDID. I mean, there's certain values that do not get published to Access GUDID, such as like the FDA listing number. They're still going to keep that a mystery, and I believe you all are probably happy with that. And but there's still a good deal of other data that I think would be interesting for your organization to consume and kind of start doing some data mining in. But also keep an eye open on OpenFDA. If you're not familiar with that initiative, the FDA has been publishing data sets publicly. So they put out some APIs that you could utilize them. There's adverse events. To this point, I don't think they have the UDI in the adverse events they're publishing yet, but that'll be coming. Those adverse events are in HL7 ICSR, coming from the same common product model from HL7 SPL. So all this data is meant to live together someday. So just keeping an eye out on that site, and as data becomes available, you can see what types of things you could do with it. There's the reporting product data to consumers, distributors, and such. You now have that ability, you know, if that's done through GDSN or what other means. But now you have, again, trusted source of data. And speaking about ROI, this is a story that was brought up to me recently that I thought was pretty incredible, where a company, as I mentioned earlier, the FDA has these ACT messages saying that your submission has passed validation, so it would be an ACT 3 pass. A company designed a tracking system, reporting system to read that positive ACT 3 for that DI and kick off downstream processes automatically, such as going into the order management system and shipping. So whatever their process was before, where they would, you know, have complicated order management systems or a process in place to initiate a shipment, they automated all of that, tying it back to the FDA response to your submission. So I thought that was pretty remarkable, and I just wanted to share that with everybody, just kind of get the thoughts going on what can you do with this data. And again, implementing a data governance program. If you don't have something like that in place yet, you do not have a master data management solution in place yet, use UDI as a way to start having those conversations in your organization. So just in summary, today we talked about the GUDID submission prep, the data prep, submitting your data, then maintaining and downstream use. This is just to try to get a little screen shock value that we're working on the Class 2s this year, and if you see in comparison to what our years prior were, we're expecting Class 2 to just be the largest we've seen yet. You know, so we have some estimates as to how large it would be, but with the experience we had in Class 2, I mean, in implantables and Class 3, you know, we expect it to be quite a busy summer. We do have a Class 2 UDI submissions guide available for download, so if you do not have this already, there will be a link where you could access that, have some useful information in being prepared for Class 2 submissions. And that's all I have for slides at this point, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
It's good that you'll be happy to take them because they are lining up. That was a great presentation, John. Thank you. And folks, you'll see in the chat box, I've already given you a link to the page where you can download these slides. We are recording this. If you need to jump off, we understand completely, but I will tell you that almost everyone is still on. That is the sign of a good presenter. Renee asks, can we export data saved in a draft GUDID submission? If so, what export formats are available?
So in a draft GUDID submission, I'm going to assume that she's referring to the FDA user interface. I'll answer it in both ways, but I'll first start there. The FDA's user interface does provide a ability to export into some other XML format. It's not even the SPL format, but I'm not quite sure if you could do that if you're only in draft. It may only be available if your record was published, but I can follow up with that and confirm if needed. Now for HL7 SPL, depending on your solution, I can only really speak from the ReadTech product. When records are loaded into our system, we have many different ways in which data gets exported back to our users. One of the main reasons is, again, the master data management need. Even though you may have a friendly UDI submission partner, such as ReadTech, that will be kind to you and not be too rigorous on data import, we do all the dirty work inside the system, and then we export back to you exactly what the FDA's controlled terminology is and values are, so you could sync up with your master data management system.
Thank you, John. Next question. Jay asks, we are a paper-driven, a paper document-driven company, not Part 11 compliant. What exactly is the FDA expectations for the source of truth in this scenario? How should we utilize our MDM system for UDI? Just have a link to each product part number and its associated D number?
Okay, so we're talking fully paper-based at this point. There is information within the FDA guidance document with respect to Part 11 compliant expectations, and they differ through the way in which you're submitting and the way, so either if it's you have a third-party submitter such as a ReadTech, or you're using the web interface, and the requirements differ a bit between those. So depending on what UDI or GUDID solution you have would really dictate what you still need to do from a compliance perspective. Because there's also requirements in maintaining the data set, and they're expecting that that data set is being maintained. So if you have a solution partner that offers you that storage and has the audit trail capabilities, the signature processes, then it looks like you'd be okay. But again, depending on how you're submitting, would really dictate what the FDA's expectations are. I haven't been aware of any audits yet on UDI, but I'd imagine that's going to come, and we'll start hearing about it shortly.
Mark asks, what in your opinion is the best data storage / source formats?
Data storage source formats. Well, you have a few options. What we've chose for our system is SQL Server for storage. Source formats, we like to be as flexible as possible, but if you had to hold me down at one of them, I like XML, because I think just XML to XML communications between systems is fantastic. However, if those capabilities aren't there, we're big on Microsoft Excel as well to serve as your template for like data capture and collection. It all kind of depends on what fits your individual organization's needs and capabilities.
Elizabeth asks, if I want to use the SPL route, is there a template for all attributes required? And in the background, Dan answered, but I thought it worthwhile to read out loud. You can send an email to rt-lss@readtech.com, and their staff will be happy to help you. I'll put that in the chat box for everyone. Jay follows up with a question. We have DI records stored in the ReadTech GUDID template. So this gets populated from the data in the labeling, regulatory, etc. Can this final DI record template saved onto a protected drive folder be considered our source of truth?
And within your organization, so if you're storing this on your end and loading it into our system, not making any changes, potentially it could be. But if there's any data transformations that have to be made, such as centimeter to cm during the SPL conversion process, we'd recommend we have something at ReadTech that's called it's a MDM feed. It's called a successful submission feed, in which once nightly, when the FDA has responded to all your submissions each day, we'll take all the data exactly as it was approved by the FDA and transfer it back to you. So we personally recommend that approach because the data the FDA blessed to me, like specifically, you can't get any more truthful than that. And depending on how that template is stored and who has access to it, it could get. I think it can be done, but maybe it's not just the ideal solution.
Cassie asks, can we use the FDA PT code instead of GMDN to submit for the published record, or are we required to update FDA PT to GMDN later?
I believe you have options there. There's a lot of times we see when the GMDN code goes obsolete, they're asking you for the other code. I would absolutely always send these types of queries to the FDA help desk because as I mentioned in the presentation, they are phenomenal at getting back to you, and you know it because they track it. When you send them, it's not just like sending someone an email and you're hoping they get to it. This gets logged into a tracking system. Your ticket gets assigned, and they have metrics to meet to support those roles. And with those types of questions, I always recommend just going to the FDA because you'll get the latest thinking from them as opposed to maybe something we've experienced a few weeks back.
She adds, can the version code be the same as the catalog code? Perhaps you just know that.
Yeah, we've absolutely seen that. Since they're required, we see people putting the same thing because they don't have two different version and catalog numbers. I've seen that quite a bit.
Elizabeth asks, are you experiencing delayed responses from FDA help desk with Class 2? She's saying it's been several weeks.
Well, we do experience some delays. I'm surprised it's been several weeks. The help desk itself, I have not been quite active with the last week or so, but on the ESG and the GUDID accounts, we were experiencing delays there. I believe they're trying to strengthen up their infrastructure and prepare for Class 2. And with the limited resources that are working this initiative at the FDA's end, there's the Indira Tandoori's and such that I think they're spread all over the place. So maybe some of the other efforts that have been going on have been delaying a help desk response. But if there's, You could always, I mean, you heard me say I recommend going there first, but if there's other questions that perhaps you wanted to send over to one of the read tech subject matter experts, maybe it's something that we could easily answer. But you know, ultimately, they do clear out their queue. They get to every message.
Christoph asks, for capital medical equipment using software and instruments, do you need to use GUDID? If there are ongoing improvements, do you need to submit those?
There is specific, there's actually a, within the links of the appendix of the presentation, there's links to GUDID guidance and frequently asked questions. And within there, they start identifying or answering questions just like this about utilizing software and instruments. So I would recommend going to one of those links. It's going to be the FDA guidance, good unique device identification, questions and answers.
Charles wonders, what type of MDM system would you recommend?
Well, we don't have any, I guess to be transparent, we don't have any partnerships or anything like that with MDM providers. So, you know, I'm kind of neutral to whatever types of solutions are out there. I'm sure some are quite expensive, whereas others might be more reasonable for a smaller organization. So I really don't have any to recommend. I will say that with the ReadTech system, one of our initiatives in expanding our solution is we're looking to start expanding the data model so we can, in essence, start branching out to providing more of a master data management solution to our clients. So I would say talk to ReadTech, but obviously there's the SAPs out there and Oracle and such, but they typically come with a pretty heavy price tag.
Tammy wonders how to follow up on an unanswered FDA help desk question. She has her
case number,
acknowledgement that they received it and a case number, but that's it.
And are they, I have replied to those, but I don't know if it was the original one. I'm not sure if the original notification she received is one of those, you know, do not reply emails, but I believe there's a way, I don't know if there's, when you're in the UDI, help desk, a way to reference a previous case number when you're opening a new one. I think that can be done, but I'm not so sure they really go from the top bottom. They're probably just catching up on older requests.
Marion asks, oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I thought you were done.
I'm done. Go ahead. Thanks, Joe.
Marion asks, as a startup with a new device, when do you have to do UDI? Before submitting 510K, with submitting 510K, or when starting production? Good question.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, you absolutely have to have it before you're in the market. With what I've seen with new devices is it is one of the last things that the submission is done as production may be getting started and you're getting close to a marketing start date. However, it's still, you need to be mindful of the labeling requirements of UDI and other things prior to starting production, because if for some reason there is a misinterpretation of how that device either needs direct park marking or what have you, you certainly don't want to have to go back and, you know, reprint labels or things of that nature when you're already at the GUDID submission stage. So, like, ensure that, you know, if you're using GS1 G10s, you have all that labeled properly. But if that's all, you know, that's all well and good, then, you know, you just go ahead and make sure it's done before you're actually marketing the product.
Does Anne need to apply for UDI on the controls for specific compounds in plasma. She has IBD kits.
Let me see that. So IBD kits, there is there's the ISBT codes that is applied, yes.
And
so this is not as common scenario, but this is absolutely something we'd be able to, work through with.
Her address and company are registered in DUNS using German words, but her labels are in English. Is that a problem?
It should not be a problem. We're only including the DUNS number itself in the submission, so we don't even provide the name in the electronic record, just the DUNS number. So as long as that matches, we'll be fine.
Doug asks, are there other sources to obtain GMDN codes besides paying for membership to a GMDN agency?
Not that I'm aware of. Digging in Access GUDID perhaps for data that was submitted, but not a definitive source. Yeah.
Thaddeus asks, when was the grace period raised from 7 working days to 30 days? Are these working days or normal days?
Right. This is a funny story for me because here at RETEC, we just launched the first version of our UDI software application probably in, I don't know, March or April or so of 2014. And of course, we set up the grace period to be 7 business days, just like it says in the FDA technical specification. And we go live, and everybody's having a party. We validated the system. Clients are loading data. And then we get an email from the FDA through that email group that I was recommending to sign up for going, we're going to temporarily extend it to 30 days. We're like, no, we just validated the system. So we had to go back and do a patch like right away because there's a lot of business rules related to that grace period ending. So we got that under the control. But so they did that back in 2014. Even for the first Class 3 wave, it was 30 days. We now are much smarter on our end and have configurable ways to change everything. So as soon as they say we're back at 7, we just got to switch the config file and we're back at 7. But yeah, that was one near and dear to me.
John, I know you have a hard stop in 2 minutes. I'm going to get 1 or 2 more quick questions in.
Okay.
Khalid asks, he has a DUNS number. He's waiting for the D&B to correct his system, his information in the system. We're afraid we're losing precious time waiting on the D&B. Should we just submit a GUDID account request to FDA with the DUNS number we have already?
And I believe that would be the DUNS number that is good, and they're just waiting for DMB to correct. And if that's the case, I would say yes, use what you know is correct, send to the FDA. You could even put some language in the body of the email and submitting that request and advise them of the situation. But with, time being of the essence right now, they want to proceed with getting the account set up.
Okay. Last question. Cassie asks, where do you locate the FDA listing number?
There's no online source. This is considered proprietary. So organizations would have to look into their 510Ks or such to find what their listing numbers are. It's all going to be within your internal files and records. So there is nothing really. If I wish there was something, because then we could add that to our system to validate that you have the right FDA listing number. But that's like the one piece of information we can't get our hands on, and it also does not go up on Access GUDID.
I would do you a great disservice if I didn't throw in Christoph's question. Can RETEC bring consultancy to any company?
RETEC's always willing to listen to what your needs are, yes.
I had a feeling that might be your answer. John, that was an excellent presentation. I know you got to pack and get on the road to Thailand. Thanks for doing this for our members. For those of you who have another dozen or two questions in our queue. They will answer each and every one of you. We have your email information. John, on behalf of the Medical Devices Group, thank you very much for sharing with us today.
Thank you, Joe. I enjoyed it.